All right, Penn State fans, it's the middle of May 14th edition of BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. Penn State waiting around for things to happen now at this point of the calendar year. Recruiting is about to pick up in a big way. We're going to talk just a little bit about that as the Nittany Lions' torrid hot streak continues on this edition of BWI Live. We're going to look at some position groups and where Penn State ranks on offense in terms of strengths and things that can be improved on between now and the start of preseason camp. And we're also going to dive into a suddenly very popular conversation among the Penn State and college football fan bases, and that is, should Penn State be a preseason #1 team?
Yeah.
D. Frank, how you doing this morning?
So I got a text this morning. I woke up to a text from our buddy Landon. And he said, "You all right? You sound sick." I am in the midst of the worst allergies I've ever had in my life. Actually, the worst allergies I ever had in my life were 2.5 weeks ago. But at this point, I will never not sound like this. I'm assuming this is a perpetual thing for the rest of my life and eternity. So I apologize for that, for people especially listening on the audio side of things that can't see my lovely, bright and shining face to balance things out. And you're just hearing the nasally, snotty, gross me. So if I miss the cough button today or the next couple of days, my bad. Greg, how about you?
T. Frank, I think everyone's dealing with a little bit of that right now. It's some lovely weather fit for a duck we've had here in central Pennsylvania the last few days. So between that and just a general spring change of things, it's impacting everybody a little bit. Before we get too much further, want to congratulate and shout out Brian in the chat. Said he was finally able to catch the show live because of paternity leave. So congratulations to you and your family, Brian. He also mentioned that maybe in 18 years there could be a new football water boy. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe he'll be on the team, Brian. You never know.
Yeah.
See Steven in the chat, a show regular. Good morning to you. Christian is in the chat as well, a regular. Good morning to you. Wherever you're listening or watching, thanks for being with us here on this edition of BWI Live. T. Frank, let's get rolling here with the latest on some Penn State alumni in the NFL. As everyone knows, Penn State had a handful of players either that were drafted, some more signed with teams in the NFL as undrafted free agents, but rookie mini camps gave us an opportunity to see some more things play out. So 3 quick news nuggets, maybe 4. I see you just added something. Good call. We know Amin Vanover was really the one guy who did not, his name did not surface at all after the draft. He popped up at some tryouts recently, was with the Miami Dolphins in camp over the weekend. As we talk at 10 a.m. on May 14th, has not signed with them. They did make some other signings out of that rookie mini camp, so we'll have to wait and see. Time will tell on that front. Dvon J. Thomas had to wait for his opportunity, but he does earn a contract with the Buccaneers. I saw a report it was a 3-year deal too. I'm not sure how much of that is guaranteed, but as an undrafted free agent that waited some time, he went to a tryout with the Bucs and signed there this week, so good for him. 2 guys who have been in the NFL. Amani Oruwariye is now joining the Tennessee Titans. The cornerback was with Dallas last year and a contributor for the Cowboys. And some Penn State on Penn State crime, T. Frank. Jonathan Sutherland signed with the Las Vegas Raiders, and a byproduct of that was that Brandon Smith was cut. So we'll see where he ends up here moving forward. But any initial reaction to that? I guess mainly the Vanover one. Are you surprised he is still looking for someone to cling on to in the NFL?
So one of the problems is you can always make a case for anything if you have enough of the facts. And I am surprised. I'll just start with, I am surprised because he's a big-bodied defensive end who's shown good quickness, violence, and strength at the point of attack. So at the very least, there is so much moldable clay there. I don't know if there's like some sort of injury history or red flag with Vanover. I don't know of any, so I'm just speculating at that point. But the question is, what is he? And that's always been the question is, what is Amin Vanover? 266-pound defensive end, does not look like Denai Dennis Sutton or Abdul Carter physically, like from that perspective. He is he's not exactly a lean 266, and he almost played defensive tackle at Penn State at one point, and then they figured out his best position would be defensive end. So is he a 5 technique? Is he a guy that plays a 3-4 position, as that base defensive end? That doesn't really exist anymore. Even the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have a very famous, 5 down front, go to a lot of even fronts with Cam Hayward playing a defensive tackle role in this modern hybrid everything's everything defense in the NFL where you can pivot from one to the other. Right. So is he caught in between two worlds, and does he have to make a decision that isn't defensive end? Because I think the initial reaction is He's not an NFL defensive end with the burst and length, the what teams are looking for from that high-end athleticism to get to the edge and bend to the quarterback. I think he's got the bend. It's just the speed and kind of that initial quick step. So, I don't know if he has to make other decisions about what he's going to be at the next level, but it seems like there are a couple of those things floating in the air about him and his transition, because all the other measurables are there to be like, this is obviously an NFL body type.
Yeah. So he said at Pro Day that for those interested in looking back at how this whole thing played out, that he was preparing for the NFL and the draft process, even while his petition for an extra season of eligibility played out. So if you're thinking that maybe his lack of finding a team is due to when the news to Sean Fitz at BWI broke about his petition ending and that he was not going to get an extra year of eligibility, he claims not. So, we'll just have to see where he ends up. There's time. There's more of these off-season activities that go on in the NFL. Obviously, training camp will be here before we know it. So, won't shock me to see him pop up this somewhere this summer. But, yeah, certainly T. Frank, I thought he would have caught on somewhere by now. So definitely a little bit interesting as we wrap up, or get closer anyway to wrapping up the draft process for this group of guys who came out in 2025.
Yeah. I'm surprised the 49ers haven't been interested, because he's got that skill set that they like, of a guy that they like, powerful defensive ends that can run the game up front with just 4, that can stop the run with 4. And they really like guys that have the versatility to kick inside. And I know he hasn't shown a lot of that in in college, but the traits are obvious. So I'm just, I think he's going to find an NFL home before the start of the season.
I want to shout out Ryan, one of our regulars. He says, T. Frank, you have a Barry White voice now. I don't know if you have any reaction to that, but there you go.
I think it's a compliment, and I'm bad with compliments. So thanks, but I
smile. Yep, just smile and shake your head. Yep, you got it.
I'm not going to try and give you any of the Barry. Yeah, no, not going to do that.
Yeah, Steve Gold, longtime listener, first-time live viewer. Thanks for being with us, Steve, and good morning to you, Glenn. As they would say, I believe, this is your neck of the woods more than mine, but I would think the way they would put it if this was a radio show was that the first half of it is open lines. So if you have any questions in the chat, feel free to drop them in for us. But a conversation that we mentioned briefly in the open is that the Elite 11 is coming to Penn State, or State College, rather, this weekend, which will bring recruits to Penn State. And obviously it's not just the Elite 11, it's also the All 22, which will bring prospects to campus that are not quarterbacks, potentially, who will be working out at State. I'm assuming they're at State High this weekend again.
Usually it's at the stadium downtown.
Yeah. So you and Ryan and Sean are going to cover this pretty in depth on the Thursday edition of BWI Live. Of course, that comes to you all every Thursday at 10 a.m. live here on the YouTube channel and on demand, both here and wherever you get your podcasts. But T. Frank, I know you'll be out there. The guys will be out there. Any thoughts initially on what you're most looking forward to about that event this weekend that has really become a boon for Penn State over the last few years of having this event that draws elite prospects, not just from the State College or even Pennsylvania and Mid-Atlantic areas and regions, but from players across the country?
Yeah, I think they've had a quarterback at this State College Elite 11 for the last 3 years in a row. And before then, he wasn't here, but Jackson Smolik made the finals when he did his Elite 11 camp, which, was elsewhere. I don't remember exactly where it was. Yeah. So it's become a tentpole sort of event for Penn State football quarterback recruiting. And they've more often than not had a player in the final. And this year they got 2 bites at the apple with Peyton Falzone and Troy Hune, who are both going to be at the camp in State College. Now, there's a plus and a minus that, like, if they had gone to different ones, if Troy Hune had gone one to a qualifier out in California, maybe he gets there and Falzone gets the automatic bid from this weekend if they were both to be the best quarterback automatically invited. But there's a secondary process where they'll review the footage, and anyone worthy will then be invited afterwards beyond the initial, like, this is our top quarterback. So, like, that's just the surface level. Penn State's got 2 quarterbacks there. They've sent one to the Elite 11 final pretty regularly with Smolik and Grunkmeyer. Kritza did not make it last year, but Troy Hune is a good, technically sound passer. So getting to see him in person, getting to see him just perform is going to be interesting because, there's a lot of we've known about him for a while, and a lot of his traits and a lot of the things that we know about him were on the scene early, and then everyone kind of caught up to him. This is a great opportunity to see him against his peers. And then for Peyton Falzone, this is a great opportunity for him to show off and to show that development we've been talking about with Brad Mendler. That's a huge thing this weekend, is seeing in person and having a large sample size, not just highlight clips that are, everyone's going to do something like that where Brad's going to put the best throws out there, right? Seeing all of them and gathering as many of those as we can this weekend is going to be really important to see where he is on that trajectory, on that path towards being a quarterback, right? And so this is a big moment, I think, specifically for Falzone, but for both players. We talk about Troy Hume taking a step back in terms of the rankings. He hasn't changed his game whatsoever. It's just there's more information about other people. Now you get to compare him to his peers. And then for Falzone, this is an opportunity to show off, not only because they do combine testing as well, so he'll have an opportunity to show off his athleticism and his arm and his improved mechanics. So down the line, if you see a big bump from either of these guys, this is a direct reason why that might happen.
It's a big moment for you, too. I mean, you can see Peyton Falzone in person right down the road, but how excited are you to see Troy Hume come across the country and work out right in your backyard?
I'm really excited. Yes, I'm really excited about both of these guys. I think that both of them are good candidates to be, guys that can play at Penn State. And the upside for Peyton Falzone specifically, and the tangible work he's done so far to change his throwing motion, I just want to give credit to these guys. And I know I've said this before on the show, but we're in an era now where if you have access and more people have access to throwing coaches, there are more athletes on the table to be quarterbacks going forward. It used to be that, sorry, your throwing motion isn't good enough. You got a baseball throw. You're not an NFL quarterback, so you got to play a different position. From the neck up still matters. That hasn't changed. There's still a threshold and a very small percentage of players that reach that level of mental ability to be elite quarterbacks. But the traits and the throwing motion and all the baseline things, there's I don't want to say a lower barrier for entry, because Peyton Falzone's been traveling to Ohio for the last 5 months or something like that in order to, do all of these things. But it's doable. We've put so much time and money and technology into figuring out how to properly throw things that now we're able to fix and tweak and optimize players. And I'm fascinated by that kind of theory and that kind of idea. So I want to see how it applies in real life. And then obviously for Hugh, I want to see him in person. I want to see how he throws the ball. I want to see how he throws off platform. I want to see him in an offense that isn't just RPO footwork. I want to see him be able to drop back and throw some routes. And so, the problem is normally I key in on one quarterback. I don't know. I need to find a way to copy myself and be everywhere all at once, because obviously there's going to be 27 guys and 28 guys that we're interested in too. But, we're going to be focusing on the Penn State commits for sure.
Well, you can find out more about the Elite 11 and the All-22 coming to State College tomorrow on the BWI Live Show here with Tom T. Frank and Sean Fitz and Ryan Snyder. You can also find more both before and after the event at bluewhiteillustrated.com. So we did say we get to some questions in the chat. So the first one comes up. What have you guys seen out of Rucci? So we're going to talk about the offensive line and that position group in particular during the second half of the show. So we're not ignoring your question. I just want to save that conversation for then instead of having it twice. Ryan asked a question on the mind of many. So what are the chances Oregon is a night whiteout? So here's the deal. As I'm sure you've read over at bluewhiteillustrated.com or heard the upfront presentations for a variety of television networks and companies were this week, as we talk on May 14th at about 10:15 a.m. Eastern time. Nothing related to the whiteout has been announced, shared, otherwise revealed from those presentations, which, we have seen some other stuff across college football. 2 Ohio State kick times came out from Fox this week. Not Penn State's, obviously, but the game is, of course, one of them, and then the week 1, Texas, Ohio State, the other one. So those are out there. ESPN released a bunch of kick times yesterday, which was May 13th, and Notre Dame's home schedule is out. But as we sit here today, no news on the whiteout front or Oregon kick time or any Penn State kick times for that matter. This week, I'm expecting, and as Ryan Snyder has reported, at the end of the month, the Big Ten and its its TV partners usually dump a bunch of games and a bunch of kick times for the first 3 weeks. So we'll keep you up to date over at BWILlustrate.com on that. But I mean, look, I don't think I'm going out on the limb here to say that after everything that we heard, saw, whatever from Pat Kraft talking last year, James Franklin talking last year, if Penn and considering what the Penn State home schedule is, and considering Oregon is not only the best team on the schedule, but also coming from the Pacific time zone, in my mind, if Penn State can't get this one to be a primetime whiteout, then it's never going to get one to be a primetime whiteout. I mean, that's just kind of where I'm at with it at this point. So we'll wait and see if it tracks that way. But certainly, I mean, it's very hard for me to look at the schedule, put all of the factors into place that go into when the whiteout is, if Penn State could get to pick, and then how the TV draft works and how the Big Ten doesn't, I don't think once Oregon playing a 9 a.m. body time game in State College, there's just a lot of things point in favor of that being a primetime whiteout, but not official yet. We'll have to wait and see. But again, my go-to at this point with T. Frank is just simply, if they can't get it this year, I just don't think they're ever going to get it.
Yeah, and it just becomes a value proposition. What's more important to you, to the kind of college football in general? Best product possible, maximize revenue. Which one is more valuable? And obviously maximizing revenue is the number one thing that TV is going to do. But there is and James Franklin has pointed this out when he talks about degrading the product with the total number of bodies on the roster and not being able to add any if you cut out players, with the new scholarship limits or the new roster limits that might be imposed this summer. Eventually, if you keep chipping away at the quality of the product, people are going to be less interested. That's how that works. So there is a deep and fervent appetite for college football.
Right.
But it's not infinite. And you can, do things to kind of chip away at your advantage of how popular it is. And the whiteout not being at night is one of those things.
Yes, I know it frustrates fans of all Big Ten schools who find themselves, on the receiving end of Big Noon kickoff. But guess what? A lot of things, Penn State, and if you're listening to us from as a fan of another school, certainly I know there's a lot of frustration over the Big Noon kickoff and the big games all being at noon. But Fox is also paying a lot of the bills at your favorite school for a lot of things that might be seen as an upgrade or adding funds to this pot or that pot, etc. So it's a give and take. Fans, I've realized, feel the brunt of it and are frustrated by it. But at the end of the day, the Big Ten and its members, and Penn State is one, are certainly happy to cash those checks. So we'll see how that all shakes out. T. Frank, Ari Wasserman at On3 is the latest college football national analyst to put Penn State on top of his preseason number one rankings. Joel Klatt did the same of Fox Sports, and Mark Schlabach of ESPN has Penn State at number one as well. And it's led to a very interesting conversation inside of the Penn State fan base. I've heard from a lot of people on this topic, and it's the fact that a lot of Penn State fans don't want to be number one. In fact, they're almost building a consensus of, don't do that. Someone sent me the link to the story yesterday with the Nick Saban rat poison quote that went around of, however many years ago. And it's just an interesting conversation. Curious what your thoughts on this are. Curious to see what you have to say in the chat. Remember, if you are listening on demand in the podcast, you can still leave your comments and also any questions that we can get to on future shows. So don't let that deter you. But curious your thoughts on just sort of that reaction. Then we'll get into whether Penn State should or should not be number one and our opinions on that. But just your thought on the fan base's reaction to it almost being a bad thing that there's so much external respect for Penn State at this point in the offseason.
Yeah, so this is tricky. There's a couple of things there's a couple of thoughts that I have. And I don't want to be offensive with some of them. So the first thing I'll say is that my position is you should want to be number one, and you should want to go out and prove every single play, every single day that you are number one, that it's something that these guys have worked hard for, in the offseason, in the season before, the reason they're coming back. There is no competitor out there that wants to be number four.
Right.
So that's my opinion. That's just how I would that's my mentality. I would want to go out and then win every game 64-0 and prove that I am number one, and you can't do anything about it. Secondarily, the conversation about who, where's the right place to start, how do you want to be ranked so that you have that internal motivation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of recoil or reject ideas that feel like they're based in fear. Right. So the fear is if you're number one and then you're not number one anymore, now you're not number one, or the idea that some of these players would feed into their own ego that they're preseason number one, and then they wouldn't go out there and try and prove it. Penn State's built the internal systems to take care of that as best they can. They've recruited the players to have the mentality that doesn't matter as best they can. If you're trying to then tweak in the margins of whether or not they're number one or not, I feel like that's the answer there, right there. So if that is true, that being ranked number 4 is better because then you have the motivation of pursuing number one, maybe these players aren't the ones that are going to win a national championship because they didn't have the intrinsic motivation to begin with. So it becomes a chicken or an egg thing for me on the concept side. So that's just kind of my initial reaction, but I absolutely understand the superstition. Or like you can't go anywhere but down when you're number one. I totally understand that kind of thought process.
Yes, and I think that's where some Penn State fans are coming from. Others, to your point, have a thought of not being afraid of that number one ranking, but instead just thinking that there's some other teams out there who deserve that spot more. And look, I mean, I think if you're putting these rankings together, and this is not the preseason AP Top 25. This is not anyone. This is a post-spring poll, which is what we do in the media industry to create content and interest and conversation in May. Last year, somebody asked in the chat, Georgia and Ohio State were 1 and 2 in the initial AP Top 25. That won't come out till mid to late August once preseason camp is underway. But I think, does Penn State deserve to be in the conversation? Yes, there's no doubt in my mind, based on what it returns, based on what it did going out getting Jim Knowles, and based on what it accomplished last year. Certainly it deserves to be in that conversation. Now, whether or not you would put a number one, as some other people have, is another one. T-Frank, and this is a weird conversation to have because it sounds like a little bit like a cop-out, but at the same time, I have not sat down and done this exercise. So for me to sit here and tell you I feel very strongly one way or another just isn't true. But at the same time, when I look at what Penn State brings back and I look at what teams did across the country, Penn State loses a lot. There's no question about that. It loses a lot. It loses, Abdul Carter, Kobe King, all the guys
middle
who were
of the
drafted,
defense, really.
The safeties, yes. And there's a lot to return there. So it loses a lot. But a lot of other teams across college football lost a ton too. And so I think you got to take that into consideration when having this conversation. But, I mean, again, by and large, these are post-spring rankings. They're not end-all, be-all by any stretch of the imagination. But, if I'm talking about what team I would put at number one if voting in the AP Top 25 for the summer, I would give Clemson a very long look. I would give Texas a long look. Georgia, obviously, a long look. Ohio State would be under consideration. Oregon would be under consideration. And obviously, we're talking about top 5, top 10 teams here. But just off the cuff, if you were doing this, would you have Penn State 1, or do you at least think it's fair for them to be in that conversation?
Yeah, it's fair to have for them to be in the conversation. And I, like you, see, here's the thing. We know Penn State in depth, inside and out. We know the guys that are freshmen that can be good. We know the guys that are seniors that maybe are overrated. Like we know we know too much about the team.
Right.
I don't know a whole lot about Clemson or Texas. Now I know a little bit more about Clemson because of what I saw of them last year watching SMU. Their offensive line gave me like nightmares watching that offensive line. Texas, I think there's certain things about them losing NFL talent in the secondary and the defensive line, but I haven't been following them to know, do they have, high 4-star guys that are taking their place on the defensive line? Have they gotten transfers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Is Miami's investment ever going to pay off, right? Miami's been spending money like crazy. They get a guy, they get a Carson Beck at quarterback in an offense that already was great last year and has proven that it can be it feels like you can plug guys into that offense and get yards, but what's up with the defense? Like
Right.
So there are things I don't know. But I do know that this Penn State team is one of the most complete I've seen in a long time. And I have a few questions, and we're going to get into the back half of the show talking about power ranking the offense. Number 5 at this point is not a disrespect because they are so deep and talented. I do have it is interesting. And so I'm going to get in trouble here. But I'm just going to say this. Penn State fans love being disrespected. Like, this is something I've noticed because, in the rankings before, Penn State's always too low. Penn State is not high enough to in the rankings that they deserve. Or they're disrespected in the playoffs because people are pointing out they got an easy path through the playoffs. Now, some Penn State fans are also saying that St. James from Franklin can't win a big game. I'm not here to argue with the comment section. But now that they're number 1, you're hearing a different set of fans saying, that's too high. So, there is this push and pull of what's the right amount of respect? Is number 2 the right amount of respect? Is number 3 the right amount of respect? And I want to know, in the chat, if you're watching live or if you're listening on the replay, where are you comfortable being ranked? Because I understand, I'm poking a little bit of fun, but at the same time, there is a real question of what do you think? And step back from your worries about the receivers or the linebackers and kind of take a look at the entire team and say, where is this worthy of being ranked in terms of nationally in kind of the vacuum of not knowing every single thing about every single team. I think it's interesting. JC says number 3 is correct. And I'm fine with that. Top 5, says Steve. Greg, did you give me the answer? Because I think number 1 is fine. Here's the point. We don't know a lot of the development from players. We don't know how all this is going to play out. So we're going off of last year's evidence, right? Yeah. So last year, Penn State was a Final Four team, and they returned to most of their team, especially most of their offense and critical positions like quarterback, running back, and offensive line. Yeah, I think that's fine for number 1 if you don't have any games under your belt to make a decision.
Yeah, so I'm with most of the people in the chat. I think anywhere 1 to 5 is fine. Top 3, top 4, maybe more so than top 5. But yeah, I think if you are having this conversation in a broader, not just with Penn State fans, but in a broader group of college football fans, you're going to hear the familiar arguments, and it's that either you believe that Penn State is following the blueprint of Michigan, Ohio State, past championship teams to a T almost, and because of that, they will potentially find themselves in the college football playoff national championship game with a shot at the title, or you worry about the fact that Penn State is, you're going to sit there and talk about the not winning against this opponent or that opponent or things like that. So that's what's going to drive this conversation the rest of the summer, and that's fine. But I think anywhere in the top 5 is fine. I would probably top 3 for me. 1 is fine, 2 is fine, 3 is fine. And maybe we'll do that later in the summer, T. Frank. We'll do our own top 25 going into the season, or at least a top 10. Maybe not a top 25.
Let's not do top 25. No,
yeah, that might be a little bit much. Yeah, we'll do
too much time.
Yes, so we'll get that to you guys a little bit later this year. But ultimately, I think it's an interesting conversation to have, and certainly has brought some different viewpoints from the fan base as well. And we appreciate you sharing those with us here on this edition of the BWI Live Show. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. Moving into the second half of the show, as promised, we're going to take a look at T. Frank's position-by-position rankings on offense coming out of spring practice. We'll get to the defense on another show, probably next week, but I don't like to put the cart too far ahead of the horse. But T. Frank, the biggest takeaway for me just looking at your list overall as we get into the specifics is that, and you made the point just a moment ago, Penn State has so many talented pieces back on offense that somebody has to, if you're doing a top 5, somebody has to occupy spot number 5, spot number 4, and so on and so forth. So the point is that there's so much, I think the defense conversation is a little bit different, where number 5 is number 5 for a pretty good reason of potential concern. It's not really the case in my mind on offense.
Yeah.
It's just someone has to be 5.
Defense is going to be, I think, much easier because it's pretty clear. And you're right. There are, if not questions, there are at least some sort of hierarchy, like clear hierarchy in the defense. The offense, I don't like this was difficult. It was difficult pre-spring and it was difficult post-spring. And I made some executive decisions here with the list that we'll see how they are received by the general public. Now that I've already made everybody mad by saying Penn State fans like to be disrespected, Argros says, what's he talking about? We don't like to be disrespected. They've been disrespected since 94. It sucks. But what I'm saying is you've been conditioned to be disrespected, right? That's what that is. For for over 30 years, you've perpetually been disrespected. So then you, like most people, then adapt to that and take that on, relish that disrespect. And then when you're not, it feels a little uncomfortable. That's all. That's just a passive. T. Frank is playing the psychologist on TV sort of perspective.
Well, as you know, Penn State fans will continue this conversation. We'll continue it as well. But let's get into number 5 on your list of power ranking the offense as we move into the summer.
Number 5.
So someone had to be number 5, as we said a moment ago. It's going to surprise nobody that just by happenstance, number 5 ends up being the wide receivers.
What?
So Penn State did made a number of changes to its receivers room both before and after spring practice. They were number 5 on this list when we talked about it before spring ball. They end up at number 5 here again. I have a pretty good, I would have put them here too, and I have a reason why. Curious to hear yours though, and just your impressions on what I thought was a very positive spring for this group.
No, I would agree with that. So pre-spring, they were number 5. And we got the previous rankings on all of these things. So we'll keep you updated throughout the list. Here's the thing. They did a lot of really good work. They looked good in the blue-white game. I thought Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross looked very good. I was very encouraged by Devontae Ross and his route running and some of the things he was able to do catching the football. They have a lot to prove. And then secondarily, I think the conversation about, and this is going to be a little bit of review from what we talked about with the better or worse from last year, from yesterday. But adding Trevor Pena says 2 things. 1, Penn State's not messing around. 2, they called for development from the young group, from the understudies in the class. Tysier Denmark was the specific guy they talked about. Tysier told us he was playing primarily in the slot this spring. And so they go out and then sign a slot receiver, is what Trevor Pena has been primarily in his career. That's how his skill set best works within an offense. That's my prediction of how he'll line up for the team. So the answer is twofold. 1, they didn't get enough development specifically from young guys to step up that they felt they needed to go and do that. Had they gotten that internal development from, let's say, 2 players, Liam Clifford finally turns the corner from stable veteran to a guy that's starting to make plays, right? And a guy that has the ability, like physical, tangible ability to make plays, but for some reason there's some disconnect between his size and his general speed and athleticism to what he's able to produce out on the football field. And then Tysier Denmark shortening the learning curve. Like, I'm just highlighting those 2 guys because they were the 2 we highlighted coming into the spring. So that didn't necessarily happen. So they went and they got a receiver. Now that has improved the room overall. I still think they're 1 guy short. Even with Trevor Pena, even with projected development from Tysier Denmark. Because I don't think just because this happened, he's out of the picture. He's going to be a part of the offense. He's just not. To me, this indicates that they wanted him to be ready to be maybe a star. They talked about that. And it probably didn't happen as quickly as they had hoped. So they're not going to just wait around for that to happen and predict and project the development. So that's why they're number 5, because they got better, but they didn't get better in a way that was an undoubted, unmutable sort of thing that jumps a lot of positions that have well-known players and depth.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on that. I'm mostly in agreement with you, but looking at the questions and concerns for this group coming out of spring practice, I wrote in both, the obvious is the answer to each of those subheads, so to speak. because we've been talking about it all offseason. And, the questions still persist about a number of things, despite, look, you can't fault what Penn State has done trying to revamp this receivers room. They hope to get Caden Saunders back healthy. Of course, he makes an impact. You hope to get a step forward out of the guys you just mentioned. You hope the transfers flawlessly and seamlessly fit the offense and get on the same page with Drew Aller and can provide a spark as well. But until you see it in person in pads in the fall, there's just, and I think I've said this before, I'm sure I have, but I'm not buying into it until I see all of that take place, or at least enough of it take place to forget about that feeling from 2024 and other years where the play just was not good enough, as we've talked about endlessly here and elsewhere. So, right place for this position group. I do think Marcus Hagans has had obviously his third offseason in State College, a very good offseason, both in the portal and in high school recruiting. That's 2025, and that's in the future 2026. And I think that his stock's going to be on the rise here. If it's not already with Penn State fans, it will be in the fall. I'm willing to cautiously buy into the improvement of the play on the field, which of course would raise his stock tremendously.
Yeah. I think what he's doing in recruiting is very good. We talked about Davion Brown yesterday on the show, who is a 2026 commit, not a 2025 commit, which I put in the title yesterday, which was just excellent work by me. But the last two classes he's put together and what he's doing in the future, nobody has patience. And obviously there's a reason, because there is this really important window and the receivers are the poster child for why they didn't make it last year. I understand the frustration, but sometimes like the hole you're trying to dig out of is not one you can just get out of in a day. And I would try to stress patience for Penn State fans. And I understand that that's not a fun thing to do, but I'm generally been in the same place as you with Marcus Hagans. I think he's doing the best he can with what he's had so far.
All right, let's get to number 4 on our list of power ranking the Penn State position groups on offense coming out of spring practice.
Number 4.
So again, there's 5 position groups and there's 5 spots. So somebody has to end up at number 5. Somebody has to end up at number 4. Certainly feels strange clicking a button here. This is about to show everyone that the tight ends pop up at number 4, which is where they were previously on this list, just because of doing so in the aftermath of Tyler Warren going in the first round of the NFL draft. Obviously, that's a part of the reason why Penn State's tight ends are at number 4, though. A lot of talent in that room. I think Khalil Dinkins is sitting on a big season, and I think some other guys we're going to talk about here in a second are sitting on better years than they had statistically a year ago as well. But there's also the very fair component, T. Frank, of you just don't know what it looks like without Tyler Warren. Not just the tight ends, but Andy Kolodicki's offense at Penn State.
Yeah, so this is the least fair position to be on this list, because the tight ends on some other teams would be number 2 or maybe even number 1 because of the depth and the talent. And I mean, they got 3 guys in the class of 2025 that 2 of them are already on campus. And Brian Kordovich, I thought in the blue-white game looked like the real deal for a freshman, like a true freshman. I was impressed by a lot of the things he was doing out there. Not predicting him doing anything this year necessarily, but just the fact that like the guy that was 3rd in the class added kind of, I don't want to even say as an afterthought, but as found money late in the process. You get 3 of those guys on top of the fact that you bring back Andrew Rappelier, and you have Luke Reynolds and Khalil Dinkins, maybe one of the most slept on players on this team. And Greg, I'm trying to decide if I want to go full throat. Khalil Dinkins is going to have a breakout year, or if I just want to say, like you did, that he's a guy who's underrated right now, because it's more than just height, weight, speed when it comes to football. The application and talent and some of the subtle things that Tyler Warren was able to do. I don't know. I truly don't know all of the details to Khalil Dinkins' receiving game, because he has just been kind of a selective use in the first 2 years of his time on the field. But his movement skills, his burst, and his general size, maybe not as big as some of the other guys in the past for Penn State, but they all come together to produce maybe a complete tight end, maybe one of the more complete guys that we've seen from a movement skills and a run blocking perspective. And that's the whole thing for a tight end, right? That's the number one job, is to be the best blocker and best receiver living between those two worlds. And I think he's got the opportunity to be that guy this year.
Yeah, so the way I put it over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com was, it's time, if you haven't, to buy stock in Khalil Dinkins. And I'm not saying it's going to go to the moon, to steal a stock market phrase, but the stock's going to increase from where you buy it today if you buy it now. And if you bought it previously, you're going to get a nice return on investment. I just was blown away listening to his teammates, not just on offense, but also defensive ends who had to match up with him during spring practice, rave about his abilities on the field as a blocker, but then also in the pass game as well. And I just think he is being slept on a little bit because of the fact that Tyler Warren did so much in this offense, and before him there were other guys in the Penn State offense at this position who had a bigger role, or a more impactful role, at least again in the minds of some, than Khalil Dinkins did. But let me run this down to you, Frank, quick, and you're going to not be happy with me because I opened a new tab, so I apologize if it gets a little laggy. But I did not have the numbers committed to memory. So this is a poster over at the Lions Den message board, which you can access for just $1 for the first week and then build annually from there. He had asked, in the context of this conversation, to compare Khalil Dinkins' stats heading into this senior year for him with some of the other Penn State players who were recently drafted. So let's do that quick. And I'm going to try and make this as not boring as possible, reading numbers off a screen. But Dinkins comes into the year with 23 career catches for 232 yards and 5 touchdowns in 35 games. Some other comparables at this point: Warren was playing in 40 games. Theo Johnson had played in 31. Brenton Strange, 24. Warren had 49 catches, Johnson 43, Strange 39. Warren had far and away more touchdowns than any of those guys. Johnson and Strange both had 5 and 6, with Johnson matching Dinkins 5. So he's a little bit behind those guys from a production standpoint at this point of his career compared to theirs. Also, none of those guys played behind the target machine that was Tyler Warren, so I wouldn't read too much into that. And the fact that he's even in the ballpark with them, I think, says quite a bit, actually, about what he might be able to do as a bigger focal point in this offense. So I think you have to be excited about him. I don't think you love the fact that Luke Reynolds was not available for the blue-white game in the later portion of spring. I don't think you love the fact that Andrew Rapplier is still coming back off an injury, but I think both those guys are in for more productive years. Rapplier, you would think, it'd be hard not to, as long as he recovers fully, based on when he got hurt last year. But I think the depth is fine. It's a little bit more unproven than you would like. The top option, is starting with Dinkins, is a little bit more unproven, but fine at this stage. And you just trust Ty Howe, right? You trust Ty Howe is going to take this group where it needs to go and where it's been under his direction for the last few years.
So I wanted to look up snaps. You mentioned games played, and I think that's a valuable indicator. That's the most valuable indicator here to me, is like, what's the experience level in terms of being on the field, because run blocking doesn't produce any stats. And so no one's going to take into account what he did last year, because it's just like, it's not a part of football that we truly measure effectively and has a historical context. So Khalil Dinkins right now has 701 career snaps, dating back to 2021. So I'm not including 2020 in that nightmare of that situation, because it's not relevant. Brenton Strange has 1,200 career snaps. Theo Johnson, 1,600. Tyler Warren, 2,000 career snaps by the end of his career. Thank
you, 16-game 2024 season.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And the fact that he was a redshirt senior, and that he played so much for so long and was a part of the rotation, waiting behind guys like Strange and Theo Johnson. Khalil Dinkins has waited behind all of those guys as well. So if he ends his career somewhere in the Brenton Strange number of snaps, that's also, like, Brenton Strange had a similar situation at Penn State. And I think from a body type perspective, and maybe Dinkins is more athletic than Brenton Strange, who, by the way, is a rising player with the Jacksonville Jaguars now. I think that's a good comparison, and one that you should be excited for, because Brenton Strange was very good his last year at Penn State, and I think Dinkins has the opportunity to be that. Here's the other thing. Because that we measure things based on, receptions, touchdowns, and yards, and like, that's all we care about, we're gonna miss some of the things that are good about Khalil Dinkins, as you just mentioned, because of his run blocking and how his team views his abilities. It would be very bad, in my opinion, if Khalil Dinkins had as many targets as Tyler Warren did last year. James Franklin made the comment when I asked him this spring about the passing game and developing it and kind of evolving it and what he wanted from the spring. He said, I'd make the argument that if we had Tyler Warren plus more receiver threats, it would have been better. And that means taking away targets from Tyler Warren. So you're going to view anything as a step back from Tyler Warren unless Khalil Dinkins has like 10 touchdowns or something, right? Unless he just goes bananas on one particular stat. I think he can be more explosive. I think he can offer more efficiency in the offense because it's not Tyler Warren's fault, but he was just used so much and he was used in so many different ways that the efficiency of every target, the efficiency of every route was not the same as if you are gaining 16 yards a catch. Like that could be a reality for Khalil Dinkins this year. So that part of it. I want to ask you, what are your expectations for Andrew Rappelier? Because I have a hard time knowing what he's going to be when he comes back. So then knowing how to fit him into the offense overall.
Yeah, and actually, I don't know if it was particular specific to this conversation, but Rob makes the point in the chat of Penn State does not rush guys back from injury, so that results in guys getting lost in the shuffle sometimes. I don't know if, Rob, you were making that point specific about Andrew Rappelier, but certainly it applies. And so I just think that there was, it's weird how college football works sometimes. Like, Luke Reynolds was not supposed to have a role at West Virginia, or at least not the one he ended up with in week 1 last year, but Khalil Dinkins was banged up, so he had a role. And then he was maybe on that, probably going to play enough to be in the green light category, but not at the level that he ended up playing.
Yeah.
But then Andrew Rappelier gets hurt in the early September, and now all of a sudden Luke Reynolds' first-year outlook at Penn State changes, and obviously Andrew Rappelier's second-year outlook changes. So I'm just very curious to see what he is able to bring to the table now that we assume he's going to be fully back healthy, ready to go for preseason camp. And what is he able to do? And I probably have a little bit too high of expectations for him, but I just have a hard time shaking what was expected of him at this time last year and what we were expecting to see before he got hurt. So just really curious how he gets his way, to Rob's point, back in the shuffle at a position group where the talent is endless.
Yeah, and what he did in that first game where I was going back to watch Nolan Rucci to write something about him earlier this offseason. I kept getting distracted by Andrew Rappelier burying people in combo blocks with Nolan Rucci. So he was on the road to being the guy we were expecting of him as, a very young but dominant adjacent blocker. I don't want to put dominant on him as a redshirt freshman, but that was going to be his skill set, was primarily that, and then the receiving threat on top of that, which would cause problems because what do you in a kind of a Tyler Warren view, what do you do if he can dominate guys in the ground and then you've got to put maybe a smaller guy on him to cover him? That gives you so many advantages. I don't know what necessarily is there at this point. And the good news is we do know like Andrew Olish is on the roster and they've got a lot of talent and depth. Joey Schlaffer showed really good ability to be a receiver during the blue-white game. So, but bringing this back full circle, tight end should not be fourth. That's just the only place for it to be.
All right. Well, let's move on to tie in your rankings for the 2 and 3 spots. So we got a T2 coming up.
Number 2.
Tied at 2, T. Frank, are the running backs and the quarterbacks.
After a lot of thought and prayer and reflection, I decided to not decide because here's the thing. This is the reason Penn State, going back to our conversation about them being the number 1 team in the country. This is why the class of 2022 decided to return en masse, essentially. And the stars of that class on offense are Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen. In the spring, I tried to differentiate between the two, and I made the point that the quarterback is the most important part of the offense, and the fact that they have a senior quarterback and the value of having a senior, and all those things empirically that I could point out. But at this point, when I was through the spring, those players aside, let's just call them a tie. It came down to the depth of the two positions. Jackson Smolik showed out during spring football, was one of the guys that James Franklin praised the most during the spring. Ethan Grunkmeyer, super highly thought of, going to be a really good football player. On the other side, and I mentioned this yesterday during the Better or Worse segment, I didn't think the young running backs took a similar step. Now, I'm not saying they're bad or they're not going to contribute, but at the same time, if we're going to be splitting hairs here, those two things came closer together to the point that I couldn't make a reasonable or discernible distinction between the two. So why fight it? These two starting units are linked. So don't try to unlink them and uncouple them. And so that's why they're number 2, number 2, and why we skipped number 3.
Very good, T. Frank. Yeah, so that confused a couple people on the board today, but if you read the first paragraph, you got there quickly. So check out T. Frank's full story at bluewhiteillustrated.com. But yeah, no, I don't have a ton to add there. I mean, I agree with you. I think that I did a thought prediction concern question for each of these groups coming out of spring ball, and I think the biggest obvious one for both is just you don't know a ton about the depth behind the top guys, but the top guys are so good that it shouldn't really matter. And if you need to really break into that depth, something's gone horribly wrong in all likelihood. So it just kind of is what it is. Fun to watch, though. Ethan Grunkmeyer and Jackson Smolik battle it out now that Smolik is healthy. Fun to ponder how Andy Kotelnicki is going to get Quentin Martin and Corey Smith involved now that he does not have to dance around them redshirting and saving those 4 games until the postseason. So curious to see how that works. And obviously they brought some guys from the high school ranks in as well. So just interested to see how that position group plays out. I just think we're going to see a lot more ways that you can get those guys. Stan talked about this a little bit, but how can they get Nick Singleton, Katron involved more in the pass game, and how can they unlock a new level for those guys? And that should be keeping opposing defensive coordinators up at night.
Yeah, and they're going to be the focal point of the offense. Talking about the tight ends, the Tyler Warren effect, I think I've seen enough. I have seen Andy Kotelnicki do this before at Kansas. This is what he's good at, when he can, putting the running backs in the offensive line in the run game in a position to be stars. And there's nothing, not that there was anything really holding them back last year other than trying to get Bo Perbula involved. I think it took some of those concepts away from the running backs. Same thing with Tyler Warren. That you're going to get a heavy dose of Fat Man and Gatorade this year.
And that should excite Penn State fans, right? That should keep everyone looking forward to the 2025 season, as should what you have settled on as the top Penn State position group on offense coming out of spring practice.
Number 1.
No sense in delaying the obvious and the inevitable. The offensive line, T. Frank, takes your top spot coming out of spring practice. They were number 3 going into spring ball. They're now at number 1.
And it was more about those other 2 positions and retaining what they were and having those players come back. The offensive line is in a similar position, but at the same time, the quarterback and the running back touch the ball on every single play. But the growth, I don't think any position got better than the offensive line this spring. And I want to highlight Javen Williams as one of the biggest reasons why. Now, they did lose JB Nelson, and that is I think the idea of JB Nelson was maybe more than the output of JB Nelson on the field, because he was one of the more talented guard prospects they've had come through in a while. Watching him at Lackawanna Community College, seeing the talent and the obvious ability, the obvious strength and everything he had. Injuries were a big part of that, where it never really got to where it needed to be. But if we look at it, in 2023, he was supposed to be the starter after, was it even 2022? Trying to think, where Landon Tangwell is supposed to be the starter, right? Landon's supposed to be the starter, and then JB Nelson's the starter, and then suddenly Venga Ioane is the starter as a redshirt freshman. Then we fast forward to this upcoming year, and Cooper Cousins and he were battling for a position at guard, and it was going to be Cooper Cousins. So, like, the tea leaves are there that as much as JB Nelson was a swing tackle who struggled at tackle when he was forced to play in the SMU game, never really made an impact at guard to the point that he was the starter. Javen Williams can replace that and has shown me already just in the spring and watching him at practice in the blue-white game, he can be that guy, both at tackle and guard. So that is, I don't want to totally say an upgrade, but when you have a 5-star offensive lineman and people are talking about the light coming on, that's massive. Let alone, and I know I'm filibustering here, they have a minimum of 4 tackles that they like. Tell me the last time Penn State has 4 offensive tackles that they're trying to find a way to get on the field. Wow.
Yeah. Tell me the last time Penn State offensive line was number 1 on anyone's post-spring projections or power rankings of, I'm trying to think of telling 2021 or 2016 me that Penn State's offensive line, to the point you're talking about with depth, the point that it is now. And it's unbelievable. The concern, of course, to me, and they played a good amount of football last year, so it's not the end of the world. But I just don't love the fact that Nolan Rucci and Anthony Donko missed some time this spring. That's a concern at right tackle, but you got 2. So you don't need them both to be ramped up, ready to roll. I think they will be, but you don't necessarily need them to be ramped up, ready to roll for the opener if that's not the way it plays out. But again, there's no indication it won't play out that way. But that is certainly a boon for Penn State. And, the depth has never been better across this offensive line. I guess I'll make one more obvious point, but just think about a guy like Cooper Cousins and how many other Penn State offensive lines in the James Franklin era he would have started on as a true freshman.
Yeah,
there's a few I can think of, maybe not all of them, but more than a few. But Penn State had what it needed at those spots last year, so he was able to get his feet wet and work his way into that. What we expect to be a starting role this year without being forced and rushed onto the field. So, great work by Phil Troutwine, James Franklin, this staff to really develop a group that is the nation's, or at least very much among the nation's best offensive lines entering the 2025 season.
Yeah, you bring up a couple things that I've been trying to remind myself of and remind people of, the fact that neither Anthony Donko or Nolan Rucci are completed projects. Both of those guys had areas where they could get better, and we really didn't see Anthony Donko perform at his best against the best competition. We saw him dominate Illinois specifically, and then after that, he was injured the whole year. So what is the best of Anthony Donko? What does it look like against the best of competition for Penn State? That is a gap we don't know yet. And Nolan Rucci, while he improved a lot, where is he physically? Did he get stronger? Because that was fundamental to his development. And then his general development, not having spring, not being able to work on his pass sets and not being able to work on balance through contact and those things that we highlighted this offseason, and using his hands correctly and not lunging and all those things that he got better at throughout the season. Missing time is missing time, and you can't overlook that. The other thing is that I don't want to there's been this rush to anoint Cooper Cousins as the guy this whole time. And I'm not trying to get in the way of that. But did he have a real competition? And what does that say about the depth on the interior? Because in an ideal world, I would say Javen Williams is battling with him and JB Nelson in the spring. But he had to play right tackle. Now you've found that you have a third option at right tackle that is way better than anything else, right? Because you can work on guard later. He can get acclimated. He's done that already. He got guard snaps last year. But if we're talking about ideal world circumstances, and nobody has these, you would at least have a little bit of that in the bank of okay, we've seen the combinations. We've seen what we want to see from these guys. They couldn't really do that because Owen Alasini and Garrett Sexton are taking meaningful snaps at tackle because everyone's banged up. And so that, I think, is just a small note, a very small footnote, an asterisk in the corner on this conversation of what should be a dominant offensive line.
There you have it. That's Thomas Frank Carr's power ranking of the Penn State position groups on offense. We will have a look at the defense later this spring or heading into the summer. T. Frank, a busy week ahead. Elite 11 comes to State College. You guys will be out there covering it this weekend. We'll have a complete preview of it with you, Sean Fitz, and Ryan Snyder on the recruiting show tomorrow here on the BWI YouTube channel and wherever you get your audio. It's official visit weekends coming up, so there'll be a lot of talk about that. I don't know. It's funny. We needed the phone lines to fill the first half of this show, and now I'm starting starting to think, how are you guys going to fill only 60 minutes?
Tomorrow.
It sounds like some overtime might be needed tomorrow. A lot to get to. And of course, for $1 for a week, and then billed annually from there, you can get all this info from recruiting to the transfer portal to team news and more over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Any final thoughts as we wrap up here on another Wednesday, T. Frank?
No, just, check us out, subscribe here to the YouTube channel, like the video. It's super helpful. There's no denying we're in the off season, right? So we're coming up with creative content that isn't just the hard news to discuss. We want to get your thoughts here on the channel, but it always is helpful during these times. If you like the video, you interact with us. Thanks to everybody who's in the chat giving their thoughts. If you're watching on replay, and I know we're at an hour and I've clicked out of most videos at this point, just make sure that you comment or you subscribe. All those great things here on the YouTube channel helps us, because that is it's all money in the bank for us on the other end. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here with us. This has been another edition of BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. We will talk to you next. The guys will be here Thursday. I'll talk to you next week, and we will be giving you all the latest on Penn State here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, wherever you get your audio, and at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Have a great rest of the week.